Okay, so I was throwing the first question at you, asking how the COVID-19 have impacted local food insecurity in Nigeria, with regards the World Bank saying 2020 has been the year worst hit with global food insecurity. Want to hear from you with regards to Nigeria. Yeah.
Sure. I think I'll look at it from two perspectives. One is supply and demand. So on the supply side, unfortunately, COVID hit Nigeria really at one of the worst times from an agricultural production standpoint. Most farmers are heading out into the fields to start planting in the April, May, June timeframe. That's when they need to invest in a lot of agricultural products, seeds, agricultural inputs, etc. And unfortunately, I think during that period of time, there was a significant impact on supply chains that impacted the ability for farmers to access the things that they needed to invest in their farms. So what that created was a scenario where supply for those products was hampered, and because of that, prices went up significantly, impacting farmers' ability to actually invest in those. So what you likely saw this year was, for some farmers, you saw a reduction in their investment in inputs, which would translate into a reduction in yield, which in turn would translate into a reduction in availability of products in the market. Now, I think, for us at Babban Gona, thankfully, I think we plan very far in advance. So basically, pretty much most all of our inputs that we require for our farmers to farm the 80,000 acres of production that we supported farmers with. Put that in context, 80,000 acres is larger than the city of Abuja, equivalent to about 5 Manhattans. All of those inputs were already pretty much in place before the pandemic hit. So as Babban Gona member farmers, they were not impacted. Now, on the flip side, on the demand side, I think the reality is that unfortunately, there's a significant portion of the Nigerian economy that operates on daily wages, and I think with a lot of the impact of the lockdown, impact of the recession, so on and so forth, I think there's been a significant hit to that portion of the economy. And that's really also impacted people's purchasing power and ability to invest. So I think food insecurity we've been hit both on the supply side as well as on the demand side as well. Donald, I can't hear you.
Demand. Well, you mentioned basically in agreeing that the food insecurity issue is a real one now in Nigeria. It's basically gotten worse. Is it just the farmers? It's not just the farmers. There's the claim, as I would like to call it, that there's food scarcity. People think it's just basic demand and supply, and that's why the prices of food has gone up. They do not understand that maybe these issues that affect households directly may be from actual food shortages. So I'd like for you to be able to explain to someone who's someone who just wants to go to the market and buy food.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think so. I think I think there are two things that are creating a challenge. First, you have oftentimes, as I mentioned, oftentimes with agriculture, you see reductions in production to some degree that reduce the amount of supply relative to demand, which triggers prices to move up. But then also one of the things that we typically see in years where we have devaluations of the currency is that oftentimes what that means is that the Nigerian market is now, products in Nigeria are now cheaper and you see increased demand for those products from the sub-region, right? So I think the reality, if you look at most of the countries that border Nigeria, their currency is tied to the euro, and so as the naira devalues relative to these other products, there tends to be more demand. Nigerian products tend to be cheaper, and you tend to often see increased demand for some other products. So it's a multitude of factors, but that being one that can contribute to it as well. I'm not sure how much that contributed this time, but if you go back 4 years ago when the naira went through a significant devaluation from, I think, 150 to 200 to 300, and then eventually down to 380, that was a significant contribution to increase in food prices.
So because of the devaluation and the countries bordering Nigeria having more value for Nigerian products, did that increase our exports of food?
It doesn't. It does increase our exports, yes. So
yeah. And how does that affect our local supply for those within Nigeria?
It doesn't affect local supply, but it affects demand. So as demand goes up, prices, if supply is the same, but demand goes up, prices will move in tandem. So it is a demand and supply issue. Yeah, sometimes it's a supply side issue, sometimes it's a demand side issue, and sometimes it's both.
So basically the supply remains, demand increases, and then price increases.
Exactly.
Fantastic. So you basically mentioned what your organization, Babban Gona, has done or did, not exactly preparing for the pandemic. It was probably one of the ways you just do things. You've always done them. So did you change anything when the pandemic struck?
Definitely. I think, first and foremost, the first thing that we did once the pandemic became very real in Nigeria is we took drastic actions to ensure the safety and security of our team and our members. We implemented a 12-step program that we rapidly implemented to ensure safety and security of our team. Then I think the second thing that we recognized was that, many of us during that period in late March, early April, I'm sure were inundated with information on WhatsApp and so on and so forth, right? But the reality is many individuals in rural communities don't have access to that same level of information. So there was a gap in information on how to protect yourselves and your family. So Babban Gona basically tried to fill that gap with a lot of offline information. So we actually printed about 120,000 posters with several steps on how one could protect themselves. We put that up in about over 8,000 communities in which we serve. In addition, we put together a complementary, to complement the posters, we put together a system that a 5-minute recording that walked through detailed steps that people could use, and then we sent that out over the phone lines as a robocall to thousands of our members. Once we knew that information was there, the next thing was how do we help people protect themselves and give them the products they need to protect themselves? And we looked at many different options, and one of the key ones we settled on was access to hand sanitizers, because the areas that we operate in tend to have limited access to water. Okay. And so we actually, with the support of our partners, we were able to invest in about a tanker of hand sanitizers, about 22,000 liters. And we got that distributed rapidly to about 150,000 people in rural communities in which we serve. The final step that we took was, it became very clear at the peak of the lockdown, the economic fallout for those most vulnerable in our society. And most people think of Babban Gona as an agricultural company or a technology company or a finance company, but the reality is we're actually a technology company. And so we were able to take a lot of our technology and redeploy it. And within 72 hours, our team was able to deploy and build a coalition of about 30 public and private sector partners to launch givefood.ng, which was an emergency food relief platform that now has provided over 250,000 meals to families in desperate need.
that's a whole lot of work that Babban Gona did. I'm not going to be asking you how much money went into that, but it seems like you guys did more than a whole lot of other people may have done. The people who would have been affected, who you can reach, you reached, and then you impacted them and saved them from what would have probably been the worst to come. In the next months, while we're not sure what post-COVID is, lots of places are going back into lockdown, second wave, some are in the extended period of their second wave. We don't know if to call it a third wave. The cases in Nigeria are beginning to rise. We've not had cases as high as this. I mean, last time we had these numbers where I think it was in July. So, I mean, going forward, while we're preparing for whatever post-COVID would mean, what extras are we doing to support farmers, farming organizations, your investors, your partners, to protect them from this health crisis becoming a major, just spinning out into something far more global than local?
Well, I think, we've been very fortunate, I think, and thank you very much for your kind words. But I think, the reality is none of this would be possible without just an absolutely incredible team that we're blessed to have, and just the tremendous amount of support we've gotten from our many, many partners. And the reality is, if we look at last season, so that was the season of 2020, recognizing the fact that COVID could very quickly translate into a food crisis, we as an organization were actually able to increase our investment that we planned for the year. I think during these types of crises, most organizations, I think the natural reaction is to reduce risk and reduce your investment. But we actually invested 50% more than we originally planned, enabling us to double the number of farmers and support we were able to provide in the 2020 season. Going into the 2021 season, we recognize that those supply chain challenges that we saw may come back. And so we actually are fast tracking our supply chain. Typically, we start moving, as an organization, we move an immense amount of product every year. This year, we've moved over 100,000 tons of stuff, right? Agricultural inputs, maize, so on and so forth. We typically start moving most of our products in the early part of the year. We've actually started 2 to 3 months earlier in most of our logistics, just to get ahead of that. And then finally, going into next season, recognizing the potential risk, we've committed to doubling our investment into the Nigerian farmer. And we will be supporting double the number of farmers. We're planning to double the amount of acreage, and to ensure that we can do our part to mitigate a potential food challenge.
Okay, that seems pretty good. Pretty good. It's quite a high level of work consideration you guys are doing. And we know that food insecurity issues global food insecurity issues are at country levels. Mm-hmm. What moves is Nigeria as a country making? Or before I do that, you said you guys moved a whole lot of products, I'm assuming is locally, regardless of what may have gone to export. What's the country's dependence on food import like as it stands now?
Well, the short answer is it's too much, right? I think the reality is Nigeria is blessed, right? We've got 84 million hectares of arable land. We've got some of the hardest working, committed farmers I know anywhere in the world. We, literally, we've got everything we need. If you look at from a water perspective, we've got 3 of the 8 major river systems in Africa. Pretty much from north to south, we get more than enough rain to produce most crops in the region. Now, I think the key thing that we need, and I believe that we are starting to see that. We're starting to see a significant investment in we're starting to see a significant investment in the right policies that are providing, creating encouraging the private sector to invest in the agriculture, we're seeing the right policies that are around providing some additional protection to industries, to enable those nascent industries to develop and get stronger to compete on the global stage. So I think I'm quite optimistic, quite frankly. I know it's difficult times, but I think I have seen a lot of steps in the right direction, which I think will start bearing fruit quite soon.
Okay, so I wanted to establish that we have a huge dependency on food imports. Mm-hmm. And so my next question, it almost came before time, is what moves Nigeria has made with regards to policies that can reduce our dependence on food imports. You mentioned the changes you're making towards policy.
Sure.
That's the private sector. Knowing that food security is at a country level, what's Nigeria as a country doing, the government? Are there policies in place?
Sure. So I'll give you a couple different examples. So if you look at the policy the government has had on rice over it's been a pretty consistent policy over the last nearly a decade. First they focused on encouraging investment in processing capacity. And then now they've been focusing on trying to enable farmers to increase productivity and availability of quality paddy for those mills. If you look at what the government has done with regards to the fertilizer space, if you go back 5-10 years, in the fertilizer space, the government was actually competing with the private sector, right? If you were a private sector fertilizer supplier, government would go and buy its own fertilizer and compete with you in the market and with subsidized product. But now, if you look at the way they're structuring the presidential fertilizer initiative, they're actually working with the private sector. They're empowering private sector actors and catalyzing investment into the sector. Another example is if you look at the protections that the government has put in place to make it more difficult to import products that can be grown in Nigeria. You've got the poultry ban that's been in place since 2000. You've got some, I think with rice, it's been kind of on again, off again. Maize, they recently just put through central bank, made it more difficult for people to import maize. So I think these are the types of policies, as long as they remain consistent and in place, I think you will see change. And the poultry sector is a prime example. Right, that policy has been in place since 2000. And some can argue that it's been enforced. It could be enforced better. But what that has created is a dramatic investment and growth in the poultry sector, which has created, by our estimates, 14 million jobs are created in the poultry industry and associated feed industries. That's maize and soybean industry in Nigeria alone.
Oh, that's good to hear that these embargoes and the support that they're giving to the private sector are happening from the government, and we hope that they stay consistent. So besides this, what other recommendations might you have to mitigate the risk of the pandemic, as it were, on food security and inadvertently nutrition, basically?
I think at the end of the day, one of the biggest, if you look at the number one thing Babban Gona is helping farmers solve for, it's that ability to have capital to invest in your farm to increase your productivity and profitability. Right? One of the single biggest challenge farmers have is that it costs a lot to get high yields on your farm. Right? You're talking about 100,000, 150,000 naira per hectare, depending on what crop you're talking about. And you're asking somebody that already has limited means to come up with that amount of capital. And no business, to be frank, survives without access to loans and things like that at any reasonable scale. So I think there have been significant steps by the government to increase access to finance to farmers. We've seen through programs like the Uncle Burr program, through the central bank, and so on and so forth. I think continuing to support the growth of those types of programs continuing to create the right incentive structures to incentivize other pools of capital, be it commercial banks, be it the pension funds, be it other pools of capital that are sitting there and available, right? There's 11 trillion naira sitting in the Nigerian pension industry, right? That how that capital can be put to use to support, while managing risk, which we've been able to do very effectively at Babban Gona. We've had a 99% repayment rate since inception. How in ensuring that we are able to that capital can be deployed in a responsible and effective way.
Oh, that's good. So we're basically talking about more investors in the agro business. I guess that's what it's called in the
more capital coming in.
Agricultural sector.
Exactly.
Increase to access to finance, more support from banks, pension funds for more capital.
Yeah, because let's just give you an example, right? The agriculture sector at most recent GDP data is about 30% of GDP. If you had to guess what percentage of commercial financing goes into agriculture, what percentage would you guess?
I would like to not guess, so I don't get strong.
It's only about 3%.
Okay.
Right? So 30% of the economy, a critical part of the economy to feed us all,
wow.
Right? It's 3% of capital.
So there's a whole lot of room for investment in that sector.
Tremendous.
Massive. So it's, I mean, if we're going to harness that, we're going to be seeing that there are lots of more opportunities with regards reorienting, just new changes, innovation to food systems in Nigeria. If all this, I mean, if we're able to harness half of the investment space. Can you hear me?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Second.
Yeah, because there have been claims with this agro business in the agricultural sector. I don't know if to say it correctly. In the agricultural sector, this partnerships that you call them, and where people promise 50% yield on weight of return on investment, and it just sounds ridiculous. People do not believe that you could actually make money from investing in agriculture. So it's something that is real. People want to see transparent, in quote, transparent supply chain networks and food systems. You guys know how these things work. So you're saying that there's a whole lot of opportunity in this sector for investment, just for, even if not for private investors, but for farmers and people in the agricultural business. Yes?
120% agree. I think the at the end of the day, let's be if a sector that produces a product that the average person consumes 3 times a day has to be commercially viable, right?
Yes.
Now, there are risks, and I think oftentimes people see those risks and are too concerned to figure out how to mitigate for those risks. But there are ways to do it, right? If you look at what we've done at Babban Gona, right? We started Babban Gona in 2012. From 2010 to 2012, 2 years, we spent those 2 years focused on understanding the key risks of supporting small-scale farmers and how you can mitigate for those risks. And what that has enabled us to do is, now we're going into our 10th year, right? And if I told you I could go to a rural community, identify an individual that had no formal address, may or may not have a phone, no government ID, and give that person, 100 to 200,000 naira, have a 99% chance that I'll get that back, you'll say it's not possible. But we've done it time. I'll question it, yes. Yes, but we've done it time and time and time again for 10 years, going on 10 years, right? We've done it over 200,000 times, right? So, so there are risks. Don't get me wrong, but there are ways to mitigate risks.
Okay, so now that we have the COVID situation at hand, is here. For those who were also not prepared, but because you guys seem like you were very prepared for this and more. Food production, agriculture, poultry, aquaculture, and then the supply chains. What do you advise that people do? What's the implication now that there's the COVID? What should people be poised for after this period? Perhaps another pandemic may come. We don't know.
Hopefully not. But I think this too shall pass, and we as a country, I think, need to be very focused on really ensuring that we are tackling some very serious problems that we face. And I think for us, what motivated us to start Babban Gona was we recognized back in 2010 the dramatic growth in insecurity that we see as a nation. Okay. Right. If you go back to the 90s, we didn't have the insurgencies and challenges that we had that we have today. And if you look at it fundamentally, as oxygen is to fire, so are unemployed youth to insecurity. And we have a lot of unemployed youth. And I think, each and every one of us needs to be thinking about how our actions are helping to create jobs for somebody here in Nigeria. And we need to be thinking about that every day. Because I think if you look at from 1990 to 2010, roughly 20 million youth entered an oversaturated workforce, triggering youth unemployment to spike to up to 60%, triggering not one, not two, but three insurgencies. From 2010 to 2030, the next 20 years, 4 times the number of youth, 80 million people. The population of Germany, the world's 4th largest economy, will be entering the Nigerian workforce, that already oversaturated workforce. So I ask you, my friend, if 20 million people triggered 3 insurgencies, what will 4 times that number do?
I would like to not think about it. It's going to be catastrophe on a global scale, just to put it nicely.
That's why each and every one of us needs to think: what action have you taken today to create a job in Nigeria?
It's something we're all thinking about and hoping that we can make positive steps and positive impact in this society. In conclusion, I would like to ask, what lessons might we learn from this pandemic with regards to your business, agriculture business? It's going from a health crisis to a food crisis. There surely must be lessons that we could learn as individuals, as agriculture business investors, or as the government, or just perhaps onlookers. What lessons might we learn?
Well, I think for us, I think the key lesson that we all should learn is that when these types of crises hit, it affects us all, right? Nobody is insulated from it. And I think it should be a wake-up call for everybody that we need to be very focused on creating a better life for all, and not just a better life for us, because we're all in this together.
Okay, that's pretty simple and short. So I thank you, Kola Masha, on this TED School conversation today. COVID-19 pandemic impact on food and agriculture. It's been a great conversation with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care now.